Hey guys, welcome to Juicy Tea, where I read out the best stories on Reddit, so you don't have to. The funny, shocking, and satisfyingly juicy. The neighborhood remembers, the neighborhood punishes. Posted by Tanya Sapin. This is a story I've been sitting on for quite a few years now, and having recently discovered r/ProRevenge, I decided it's finally time to let the world know what happened to a sociopath who dared cross the neighborhood. To set the stage, I used to live in a big but not huge city, let's call it Palmville. I lived near the corner of a dense suburb, nestled between overstuffed apartment buildings, a river that smelled like diesel when at low tide, and two busy highways. I was a minority in this neighborhood, and I caught a lot of heat for it. People really didn't like white people there, but enough of our neighbours were accepting of us that, aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I didn't feel like I was in danger leaving my home. It was a rough neighbourhood, but it was my home and it protected its own. The community centre was like a temple, and let's call it AM, was the priestess. In our neighbourhood, she was respected like a living deity, and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set the stage, our former landlord, a short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Our house was above my parents' pay grade, and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repair and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She'd pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, that was probably illegal, but that's irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects play a part in this story, so there's no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They couldn't make heads or tails of how she managed to float the books with so much red in them, and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbored no ill will towards them and still wished them the best. But the guy who bought the house, enter the psychopath, and today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently, when the account changed hands, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We'd been there for several years and were paying below the market, even on the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said the rent had to be ready in full on the first of every month. No partial payments, no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the first of the month, or an eviction notice on the second. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving, for the moment. Meanwhile, AM had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time had Congo lines of work trucks almost every day. People were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing, and an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighbourhood, our house was on the last street on the list, and sociopath wanted us out so he could relist the house after renovation. He never directly said this, but multiple conversations made his intent clear, even for 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhyping minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges. Because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon, and he tried to claim that we did it. Yeah, because a vet can't tell the difference between knife wounds and a mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place we'll call Banjoland. Most of us had moved, except for my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville, and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying sociopath's inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, one month he came up $20 short, and sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made the 400-mile trip from Banjoland to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff. And I can't say I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that's besides the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess sociopath figured he had won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighbourhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I'd ever been back in that neighbourhood where I didn't get a single call out, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everyone behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing, in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means, and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later, he says it's time to leave. We still had a week left, but it didn't matter, and we didn't have the money to try fight it with a lawyer. AM descended from the heavens and bought us a couple extra days. But it was evident that he really wanted us out, possibly because the work trucks were now one street away. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information that I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the events. Immediately, Psychopath moved into the house himself. Why, do you ask? Well, people who own the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of the renovations comped by the city. He figured that by moving in, he'd be able to get this house that he bought at liquidation price, renovate for free, and flip it. AM was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, their house was a rental lot and they can't change the budget now. She also told him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in our name, not his, and he wasn't eligible for the partial cost compting either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighbourhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate the exterior, otherwise she'd see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated, or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically put in new carpets and a coat of paint. This would later come back to bite him. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. However, the neighbourhood remembered what he'd done. There were vandalisms when no one was there, loud noises from the neighbours when people were there to see the house, and any time a prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anyone they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get their house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered his listing price, and then a month later, he lowered it again and finally got a bite. AM personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands, and every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly. And that's when Karma herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he'd somehow managed to damage the pipes. Black mold. AM remembered how he'd treated us, and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days. Long enough that by the time he did get the news, he didn't have enough time left to try to get it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later. In their final act, AM and the members of the neighbourhood filed every single complaint and injunction they could and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately, a cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke laws just to make some quick cash, and instead was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighbourhood remembers, the neighbourhood punishes. First she made him do the renovations out of his own pocket. Then she condemned the property and made him tear down the place he'd just paid to renovate. Nicely played! A loophole in the lease, posted by Goriando Aquano. 2 months ago, due to a work promotion, I had to relocate to another city. All accommodations were paid for, housing included. The company rented a nice place for me in the vicinity of the branch office. It's a modern 2-story house which I'm only going to live in for the next 10 months. It's privately owned and comes with a small oval-shaped swimming pool in a spacious side yard adjacent to a gazebo, where I usually hang out on my off days. I've invited my colleagues to come over and use the swimming pool whenever they want, because why not? The owner of the house used to live here for a couple of years before he and his family moved to another city to accommodate their kids' education since they're going to uni there. Everything was great and went smoothly until a couple of weeks ago. It was my day off. I was taking a nap when I woke up to loud splashing and people laughing and talking. Assuming it was probably just my friends showing up unannounced and enjoying their Sunday afternoon, I went back to sleep. But when I woke up a few hours later, I was shocked to find empty Coke cans, cigarette butts, and food wrappers all over the yard. I rang up my friends and reminded them to pick up their stuff next time before leaving, but they told me they had no idea what I was talking about since they hadn't come over that day. I resorted to random guessing, such as the neighbours trespassing thinking I wasn't home. But since I had no proof, no security camera around the side yard, and had no idea who the culprit was, I decided to wait and see. The following week, when I came home, I found 5 teenage boys hanging out by the swimming pool. To say I was surprised is an understatement. I asked them who they were and what they were doing at my place. They told me they're the family of the owner, and he told them they could use the swimming pool whenever they wanted. I told them that this house is being rented to me, and the rental cost has been fully paid. The lease agreement isn't even close to the end of its term yet. I'm the rightful owner of it, at least for the next 10 months, and responsible for it. I really don't appreciate them just showing up unannounced like that when I'm supposed to have the house for myself, legally, according to the lease agreement. One of them told me, "Ask my brother then." He told me we can still come over and use the swimming pool. We won't go into the house or touch your stuff or anything like that. It's just the swimming pool. Apparently they live in the same neighborhood and have access to the backyard through which they get to the swimming pool because the owner gave them a key. I insisted that the house comes with a swimming pool and they have no right to just barge in whenever they feel like it. And he insisted I call his brother, which I did later that night after they left. Much to my annoyance, the owner told me that yes, he'd given permission to his family to use the swimming pool. I have the house all to myself, yes, they won't get inside, but they're free to use the swimming pool. Nowhere does it specifically say on the contract that I have full temporary ownership of the swimming pool, or that he or any of his family members are not allowed to use it. Like his brother said earlier, it's just the house. I asked him why he didn't mention this to me or my manager before we signed the lease, because if he had, I would have made sure we wouldn't be renting his place. He calmly said he didn't think that would be a problem. I was fuming. I rang my manager and he agreed that there's a considerable amount of BS going on here and he'd get someone to contact the owner. All in all, there isn't much we can do. So, last week, I again came home to find plastic cans, cigarette butts, and other stuff all over the side yard. This time, I didn't bother cleaning up the mess they left behind. And the more they came over, the more food leftovers and other stuff they left behind, some of which had accidentally fallen into the pool, contaminating it. One afternoon, the boys showed up again, but since the pool was too dirty to swim in, they started knocking on my front and back door, repeatedly, but I ignored them. That night, the owner of the house rang me up and asked if I was home, and I said yes. He said great and told me that his brother would be coming over to drain and clean the pool, but he needed to connect the hose to the tap in the back bathroom, which, I'm sure you've guessed, is inside the house. Here comes my second petty revenge. I said no. They can have the pool to themselves since it doesn't say on the contract that I have full temporary ownership of the swimming pool, or that he or any of his family members aren't allowed to use it. He tried to reason with me, saying it would only take a few hours for his brother to clean and refill it, and that he'd be out of my face before I knew it. But I wouldn't budge. I recited to him the part of the lease agreement that says I have the house all to myself, which of course includes the downstairs bathroom. I even went on to warn him that if his brother or anyone else tried to break in, I would make sure the police got involved. It's been more than a week now and they haven't shown up. The side yard and the pool are reeking of death, baking in the sun for days. I just closed all the windows and turned on the AC. So I was thinking this sounds kind of illegal, like if you rent a place, you have the right to privacy and peace, etc. The owner isn't allowed to just rock up and disturb you whenever they want, even if it's outside the actual building. I've heard of landlords getting in trouble for this before, but I found something that's kind of similar in r/tenant. Landlord plans on using the pool on weekends with his family. Posted by Vikings557. My friends and I just recently signed a lease for a single family home. The home has a swimming pool, but it was specified in the lease that we're not authorised to use it. We assumed this was because they didn't want to deal with maintenance for the pool for insurance reasons. After we had already signed the lease and paid the security deposit, our landlord informed us that he plans to come with his family on weekends in the summer and use the pool. He didn't say how often this would be, but it seemed like he planned on coming most weekends in the summer. Before pushing back, I wanted to know the legality of the landlord doing this. After researching online, I could only find info on laws pertaining to entering the house, but I couldn't find much about him coming onto the property. Any help would be appreciated. Edit. The consensus was that this landlord is shady, and that we should try to get out of this lease. OB then includes the terms in the lease for quiet enjoyment and conditions of the landlord entering the apartment. It's just the standard wording. OP says there's only one line in the entire lease relating to the pool, which says they do not enjoy the right to use the in-ground pool. Update. We took everyone's advice and spoke to an attorney today, who suggested that we speak to the landlord and try to get out of the lease since a single family home implies we'd be the only ones using the property. After some back and forth with the landlord and listing agent, he agreed to terminate the lease and fully refund us. Thanks for the help, everyone. Down in the comments, customer number 2266 says, quiet enjoyment refers to the tenant's right to peace, privacy, and the use of the rental property without interference from the landlord. This concept applies to all areas of the rental property, including the yard. So basically, it looks like the landlord's plan would violate your right to quiet enjoyment. If you liked this video, please let me know, and subscribe for more juicy tea.